Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graben.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 366 of the podcast. We are doing a video episode again today. So if you're listening and you would prefer to go watch the video, you can go to leanblog.org/366. And even if you're listening, I'll invite you to go to that webpage after the episode because we're going to have a lot of links and information to share. Thanks to our guest today. He is Harry Moser from the Reshoring Initiative. How are you, Harry?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Look forward to our time together.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we could do this. I'm trying to remember which conference it was. I know I've seen you speak before and been familiar with your work, so I'll put you in the category of people where I'm like, I don't know why it took me so long to invite you to do this. So thank you.
Well, here's a good reason. I'm better now than I was before.
Better at talking about these things.
Better. I have a lot more good information. I got better material for your listeners. So you saved it for the right time.
Okay. Thanks. So just kind of help tee up the topic here. Listeners might be familiar with the term offshoring. So I was wondering if you could introduce what reshoring is and how some of these different terms, outsourcing, offshoring, and now reshoring, how those terms fit together.
Okay, well, one of those is very easy. Outsourcing classically means to have the work done by another company, no matter where the other company is located. GM outsources to tier 2, tier 3, whatever suppliers. That's outsourcing is easy. Offshoring is to have the work done in another country and then shipped back to the U.S. So we always look at it as product or concerning product that will be sold or used in the United States. So at one time it was made here, now it's made somewhere else. If it comes back to be made once again in the U.S. for the U.S., it's been reshored. Mm-hmm. Okay, if it comes back and part way, should we say, and let's say it was made in China or India, and it comes back and it's made in Mexico or Canada, then we'd call that nearshored because it got to a near shore rather than to be the shore or reshored.
Yeah.
And we see cases where each is the right choice. Obviously, we'd like to see a lot of reshoring, and we have had a lot. Mm-hmm. But there is work that is so labor intense, no matter how well you automate it, no matter how lean you get, no matter the best that you or I could do, where U.S. labor rates are just too high. Mm-hmm. And then if you can get it to Mexico, for example, where the labor rates are about the same as China's, and it's right close to us, from an economic perspective, from a lean perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And for the United States, product that comes out of China is about 5% U.S. content, and product coming out of Mexico is about 40% U.S. content. Mm-hmm. So if I can't get the whole loaf back here, I'll settle for the 40% loaf in Mexico.
Yeah. So, I'm curious of, there's some history of, I guess, decisions that companies and industries have made over time that led to you starting your organization, the Reshoring Initiative. So maybe let me ask it this way, and I'm sure your story and the Reshoring Initiative story enter into this. When did offshoring really start accelerating, and why did a lot of companies start making that decision to move production from the U.S. or other countries to China or another low labor cost country?
Okay. Taking the longer term perspective, after the Second World War, the U.S. was the dominant manufacturer. I think we had 50% of the world's manufacturing was here because the other major industrial countries were bombed to pieces, and therefore we were supplying almost everything they consumed. And so in the late 40s, the early 50s, U.S. was dominant. And we had a huge trade surplus. Gradually, that trade surplus came down until about 1979, roughly, when it turned negative. Mm-hmm. And we've had a trade deficit every year since. And it was a combination of perhaps first Japan, some point there Mexico, Taiwan, Korea, and eventually China. And so, and all the others were significant. There were times when it looked like Japan was going to make everything for the world, but it didn't. And but then finally, China was admitted to the WTO, and the duties came way down on the Chinese products, and they were supposed to open up to our products and services. And what as soon as that happened, the rate of growth of the deficit accelerated, and so it went such that by the last couple of years, the deficit has consistently been about $800 billion. That's what it would be, $800 billion per year, the goods deficit. And that represents about 5 million manufacturing jobs at current levels of U.S. productivity. So it's a big number.
Quick question: when you talk about what was happening in Japan versus China, when I went to go to grad school to a manufacturing focused program in 1997, the call to action then was trying to increase American competitiveness compared to Japan and other countries. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of cases, Japan, whether it's cars or electronics or watches or other products, you had companies entering the market and exporting to the US. Whereas with China, it was more the case then in like the early 2000s of American companies or global companies moving production to China. Is that a fair generalization, or what do you think?
I think your characterization of Japan is quite correct. Toyota and all of the good, like Panasonic, all those did a great job on their own. Probably at first they were a licensee of a U.S. company and made stuff for U.S. And then pretty quickly they did their own and did a wonderful job. Developed a lot of the lean principles, showed us how it could be done, how it should be done. So they very, very much earned it. In the case of China, it's a mix. Certainly, U.S. companies have gone over there, but until very recently, you couldn't own your own factory 100%. It's like 50-50 with a Chinese partner, and so there's a lot of that hybrid, 50-50 stuff going on, and then also the Chinese have done a wonderful job of setting up job shops, contract manufacturers, and they're good at just say being a foundry, and then they're good at machining the casting, and sometimes the same company will take that machine casting and build a refrigerator for you. So they can go from the most elemental contract manufacturing to the most integrated, which is essentially the same as a branded product company in the United States. And so a lot of U.S. companies have given almost the entire project to them: the design, the manufacture, the packaging, probably do some marketing for them for all I know. And that's bad, I'd say, because the U.S. companies have been taught by the MBAs, for the last 20 years maybe, to pick their core competence. And that turns out to be finance, marketing, strategy, maybe a few other things, but typically not manufacturing. They say, we can get that done cheap in China or somewhere. So I run into companies, they come to me and say, Harry, we're thinking about reshoring. I said, great. And they say, we've got one problem though. We don't know how to make our products anymore. Yeah. So how are we going to do this? Given that they know how to make them, we don't know how to make them.
So, before talking about reshoring, can you talk a little bit more about what led to acceleration of offshoring? Was there too much of a focus on cheap labor? You do bring up the nuance of some products are incredibly labor intensive. Was it really kind of chasing the cheapest unit production cost without looking at the broader picture, if you will?
Yeah, I think you essentially captured it there. The biggest factor in offshoring, in the sense of making it there and shipping it back to here, was the search of the lowest labor cost per hour, by reasonably competent, diligent workers, which the Chinese certainly turned out to be, and the Mexicans and the Japanese and the Koreans, and they've all been very diligent, hardworking, and so finding that cheapest place they could get an acceptable quality done and shipping it back. Now, with the Chinese market especially, when a typical U.S. branded product company went there, they justified it by a combination of what they could ship back here and maybe cut their manufacturing costs by 10 or 15%, but also because they could then start to sell into the 1.3 billion, it would be billion Chinese consumer market, which, as they experienced over the last 20 years, has grown at, the economy has grown at, 10, 12% per year, much, 4 times, 5 times the rate of most of the developed world. So if you weren't over there selling, you were missing out. And as long as you were over there making to sell there, you might as well make it and ship it back here.
Yeah.
It made sense.
Yeah. So when you talk about entry in the World Trade Organization, they were supposed to open their borders for imports. And it sounds like some of that didn't really play out that way, where to gain entry, what you're saying is to gain entry to the market, you've got to come in, you've got to produce in China, and then you're partnering, and there's intellectual property that's transferred, technology that's transferred.
All that. Yeah. And we haven't held their feet to the fire. Trump obviously is starting to do that. And it seems like the Democrats more or less agree with his objective, even if not necessarily with his technique or style of doing it. And so my guess is that emphasis, that pressure on China will continue. But the Chinese, clearly, everybody agrees China did not live up to its commitments. People talk about, and I'm going to patent this phrase, people talk about opening China up to the world. And I'd say, no, we opened the world up to China. We gave them the opportunity to come in and take the business, take the money, take the technology, et cetera.
So then what prompted you? I'm curious to learn more about your background then of where this became an important issue for you and the timing and the story behind starting the Reshoring Initiative. I know you've been around for a while. I don't remember how long exactly.
Well, the personal story, I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City. And my ancestors founded Elizabeth, 1660, all this kind of stuff. And the biggest thing in town was Singer sewing machine. The factory there in its day, let's say 1910, was the largest factory in the world. They had 5,000 workers at that time. It was 2.6 million square feet. It was tremendous. And my grandfather was a foreman. My dad ran a third of the factory. I worked there summers, high school and college. And I drove past 20 years ago, and there's nothing left. Not, as far as I can tell, nothing of Singer is made in the U.S. It's all made somewhere offshore. And then during my career, I sold CNC machine tools, foundry equipment, that kind of stuff. And I ran into industry after industry that I was in or that I wanted to sell to, and the industry wasn't there anymore. The people who made textile machinery, and they made shoe making machinery, and they made all kinds of the foundry equipment makers themselves, the machine tool, largely gone and replaced by imports. And so when I passed that Singer factory, I cried then because I said, damn, my family's legacy in this, the city depends on it, the state, the country, and it's all gone. So I started the Reshoring Initiative.
Yeah. And what year was that when you started?
2010.
2010.
10 years ago. We're having an anniversary here.
Yeah. Well, and let me tell a quick story. You mentioned New Jersey and sewing. I'll send you a link, Harry. Listeners and viewers, if the regular viewers know, in episode 364 very recently, I interviewed Mitch Kahn, who is the president of a company called Unionware in Newark. Are you familiar with them, Harry?
Good friend of mine. I visited his factory 8 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And I chose him as the Job Shop award winner of the National Sewn Products Reshoring Award.
Okay.
I know Mitch.
Okay. Well, good. Well, good. But we talked 4 years ago about what they were doing with lean, and then we talked here recently because they're now, you might know this, making face shields and gowns.
Yes.
Their bill of materials for hats and backpacks and
Yep.
binders is exactly what they needed to make these products. But to talk about Mitch's business a little bit, you mentioned earlier about labor-intensive products. And if like, to me, automation and lean are two separate strategies. They might be used hand in hand. But have you seen cases where you can use lean methods to eliminate enough waste so that the value-added work can be done in a way where the labor cost differential isn't as harmful? Is that one of the keys to successful reshoring, or are there other factors?
Well, Mitch is as good an operator, as smart a businessman as I've met. He's really clever, really hardworking. His workers make, I think, minimum wage, something above minimum wage in the United States. He pays at least fair for the industry, and so they're making three times or something like that what a Chinese or a Mexican would make doing the same thing. And I think he recognizes or has said that his costs and inevitably his price are moderately higher than the imported product, but he makes a better product, and he sells a made in the United States product.
Well, I think he's got a dynamic where he said a lot of his customers want to buy American-made / union-made products. Yes. And then there's some customers like the U.S. government that has requirements to purchase American. So, he's found himself a nice niche.
And done very well. Nice business. I'm very impressed at how well he's done. And I've been in his shop. Like I said, I walk through. Looks like people are treated well. It's a good environment. It's not a sweatshop, like you might think of something like that. So I think it's been good for Mitch. It's been good for his stakeholders.
Yeah. Now, and the other thing I was going to say about sewing machines, they have a lot of their people now working at home, and they would love to add more people. But he said you cannot go anywhere right now and buy a consumer sewing machine. That they're all out of stock because I guess people snap them up to make masks and things at home.
Okay.
So that's the one constraint, right?
And maybe he should find all those people when they've made enough masks and put them to work making hats.
Yeah. I'm sure he can find those people. But so I think Mitch's story, was not direct reshoring. It was made.
For us, reshoring is the manufacture of a product that previously had been made offshore or would have been made offshore. And so to us, it's immaterial whether you say that Caterpillar reshored its sourcing of hats. Clearly, they would have done it. But when Mitch is the one who gets to do it, we still say he has reshored because he was he enabled that to happen. Without him, Caterpillar or whomever couldn't have reshored it. So we categorize any company that picks up incremental work because to make product that otherwise would have been made offshore, we say they have reshored.
Okay. And there are some cases, maybe different category, or you can share other examples, please. But my understanding is that GE Appliances, which is now no longer part of General Electric, that they've reshored some production to Louisville, Kentucky, right?
Yeah, this was about 10 years ago, actually, and they received huge amount of publicity. Great articles in the Atlantic and other places about this process, and they had been previously having their appliances made, or at least a certain category of them made, especially the water heater, by a Chinese company who made the complete thing. Like one of these people, you give them the job, they do the whole thing, and GE looked at it and said, well, we want to make them here again. And so they brought in product from imported, put in a room, had a war room, brought in the design engineers, the marketing people, the manufacturing engineers, the workers, the foremen, and the everybody, and they tore the things apart and put them back together smarter, so that the labor hours to make the product were dramatically reduced. First thing, the efficiency, the thermal efficiency of the product was improved, and the warranty costs were reduced because of doing it smart. So, and I'm sure they automated and they did whatever at the same time. So they did it the smart way. You might think of it as design for manufacturability and assembly.
Right.
You know, coming up with a better way of doing it instead of copying what the Chinese had done, and it worked for them.
Yeah. So, are there other favorite examples of yours? What are some noteworthy examples of reshoring?
Okay. My overall favorite is a company called Morey Corp. Morey Corp. They're located outside of Chicago, and they're an EMS company, so they produce populated printed circuit boards and related electrical devices. And I had done a little work with them in the past, and they came to me about 4 years ago. And Tony, the VP sales, said, "Harry, we're about to lose our biggest customer, our biggest U.S. customer, because a Chinese company has offered a significantly lower price." So Tony and I used the Reshoring Initiative's total cost of ownership estimator to calculate all the other costs that the customer had previously ignored. So not just that X Works price, but the duty and the freight and the carrying cost of inventory and the travel costs, the intellectual property risk, the risk of stocking out, like we've seen now with the coronavirus crisis, the risk of stocking out when you have a long supply chain instead of a short supply chain. And so Tony took that into his customer, and I've got a quote on our website saying that doing that analysis was key to saving a $60 million order. Okay, so that's my favorite case.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great.
I just wish I'd asked for a commission.
So I think we'll delve more into the total cost of ownership model, but I'm curious. First, we're we're recording this on April 16th, and in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. Why do you think this current crisis should be a wake-up call about where different goods are manufactured?
Everybody, every night we hear President Trump, we hear the news media going on and on about lack of masks and gowns and ventilators and everything else that they can think of, and justifiably they don't have them, and of course they blame the system, they blame the U.S. manufacturers, they blame President Trump, they blame everybody for it, and in a sense you could say they're right because we have failed, we haven't done as good a job as we should. But when you look at the economic realities of the system, for example, with there's a broad range of medical products, penicillin, antibiotics, masks, where something like 90% of our normal usage was imported. So if you have a product, if you're used to using X, a certain amount of those, a day, and you've been making 10% of X, now all of a sudden you need 15X. And so you've got to go from 0.1X to 15X. That's 150 times increase, and that's essentially not possible to do in any practical situation.
Nobody has excess capacity.
Yeah. The material, the raw materials, the people, the machines, everything. Can you do that in a year or 2 years? Well, if you make the machines that make the material and the machines that do everything, maybe you can. If you don't even do that, and then so you're going along and you're struggling. You got people at home making masks, but you still would like to be importing from China where you used to get them. And then the Chinese and other countries say, well, we need all our masks. We can't ship them to you. So now you can't get that 95%. So you're screwed. Right? So everybody now the people who've analyzed it at all understand what the problem is. And there's been several bills in Congress, one by a Senator Hawley of Missouri and one by a Senator Sullivan of Alaska, both asking the government to do something about that, subsidies, mandates, something. And in fact, I talked to somebody from Hawley's office this morning about how we could help them.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure something will be done about that medical lack of self-sufficiency. Okay, but my intent is to help people leap the gap from medical things, which everybody is very sensitive to let's say it's not a health war, but it's a military war. Yeah, and we can't get the rare earth minerals to make the military products we need. We can't get the aluminum that we need. We can't get the electronic components that we need. Then the arsenal democracy is gone. Right? So my hope, my intent, and I'm seeing it, that people are able to make that leap from health to the rest of the economy.
So one reason to have more of a manufacturing base here for certain products is really about mitigating risk.
Mitigating risk, self-sufficiency. Like if you're a farmer, 200 years ago, if you're a farmer, you tried to grow almost everything you needed and hunt for the rest and maybe trade a little bit, But if you do the economic analysis and compare our imports, our exports, our production, our consumption, in most consumer goods as a whole, excluding food, we more than half of what we consume is imported. Across the whole breadth of what we consume, more than half is imported. Okay. And that's for the biggest, richest country in the world. That's not a sustainable condition.
Yeah. So then, there's the risk factor, but then even putting that aside, things you've been working on in the past and may find more interested in the future, there can be this total cost argument that it's not, you could look for certain products and say producing here is necessary, or, there are judgment calls about that. And then sometimes it really just comes down to business and looking at the numbers a little bit differently, which seems like something that's a strength of yours and the Reshoring Initiative. You've already alluded to it. Maybe we can dive in deeper of, how should companies look at that total cost?
We'd say, since I know many of your listeners are lean, we would say they should look at it the way Deming looked at it. So Deming, in his fourth point out of the crisis, said, stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost.
Right.
So he said that. Jim Womack, who's one of my neighbors up in Maine, says the same thing. John Shook has said the same thing. Most lean practitioners have said it. Most lean, let's say, experts have said it. Do the math. Do the math. And yet most lean practitioners in their companies and consulting don't emphasize it. They'll work on all the other methodologies of lean, but the use of total cost, for whatever reason, that has escaped them from implementing. So therefore, I'd say all of you who are lean, I'm calling on you to go back to the Bible, remind yourself on what Deming wrote, and implement it.
So a quick detour, though, and I want to delve into the total cost, more here. But one thing that is a pet peeve of mine, and there are articles like this in the news all the time, going back 15 years or more since I've been tracking this and blogging about it, and you see it recently now. People blaming what they'll call just-in-time strategies, and sometimes they'll use the word lean for these shortages. When I think, and these articles will equate, just-in-time means low inventory. And so, well, wait a minute, just-in-time, I'd say you couldn't call it just-in-time if you have a really long, slow supply chain because you've offshored everything to China. To me, that's not a lean model at all, and that wouldn't be expected to support true just-in-time. So I get on my soapbox about that. I'm curious what your thoughts are. You want to join me on the soapbox, or what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with you there. I mean, that company could be receiving product into its factory just in time, even though the product had spent a month and a half on the boat coming from somewhere. So they could still perceive it as just in time. But I like to think of it that the question isn't, is it just in time? But the question is, from where did it come? Which is what you were talking about with the long supply chain. And when the supply chain is as long as most companies have them now, first they spend millions on complex big data systems to track and know where the stuff is and what's happening to it. And then when there is a crisis, when there is a problem, when we have coronavirus, when we have dock strikes, when we have Fukushima, when we have a volcano over in Iceland or wherever it was, 10, 15, something happens and now you can't get the stuff anymore. So I think you've got a choice. Is your total risk, is your total probability of producing good product tomorrow higher if you have 100 supply chains stretching each one to a different major location in the world, each one of which could have a disaster or a revolution, or something, or are you better off to have all of those supply chains stretching 2 miles into this country around your assembly plant, and now there's only one probability of disaster, but if there is disaster, well, then your assembly plants got hit by the asteroid too, so it doesn't matter anymore. So the total probability of producing has to be higher with shorter supply chains than with multiple supply chains going out all over the world. The only exception to that would be if your quantities are enough to allow you to have multiple sources of each component. Well, then you might want to have a whole bunch of local ones and then still have some scattered around the world who are feeding into other factories at other locations, assembly plants at other locations around the world, and be able to call on those different factories if something happened to one of your local suppliers.
Yeah. If you look at the Toyota model and, people want to equate lean with just in time and China production. If you look at what, when Toyota built their plant in San Antonio, Texas over 10 years ago, they have a lot of suppliers in an adjoining building. They made sure that they got other local companies as part of their supply base. So that to me seems like more of a lean practice if you're going to generalize than, they're not trying to import all of their parts from China into Texas. And it seems like one of the challenges beyond risk, or a different type of risk with the long supply chain, is when your demand changes. It seems like a long, slow supply chain can't be as responsive to changes in your needs, right?
No, clearly, Deming was sort of talking or reporting the Japanese theory, the methodology, and if you look at the Toyota production system, where they list the wastes, all the wastes that one is supposed to avoid. Now, I've got a table that shows how each of the wastes is made worse by offshoring. So why does the average Toyota car assembled in the U.S. have a higher U.S. content than the average car assembled by the big three? Because they understand the Toyota production system.
Yeah. So let's delve into the total cost model, and for the listeners, we'll try to talk through it. But for those of you watching, Harry, you've got this good point to bring up some of the slides that you have to help illustrate some of these concepts.
Okay. So the total cost of ownership is a concept. Deming talked about it. People have talked about it for various purposes. But in supply chain, it's a well documented, but not sufficiently utilized methodology.
Right.
And basically, it starts with X works price, which in our surveys show that 60 to 70% of companies make their decision based on price. Where can I buy it cheapest? Maybe some at landed cost.
And what do you mean by landed cost? I'm sorry.
The X works price plus duty and freight.
Okay.
Some might go to that, but to that we would add carrying cost of inventory and travel cost and IP risk and opportunity cost and the value of a made in USA product and the extra work in procurement when you have to do import instead of sourcing locally, travel, and all this stuff. So we have about 29 different factors. And if you're doing purchase price variance, you have 1. If you're doing landed cost, you have 3. We have 29. And those extra 20 or so add about 20% typically, but not always 20%. Sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 35. And so instead of just saying the price in offshore has to be 80% or less of the U.S. price, we say do the math. And so we provide the free online total cost of ownership estimator, which does the math for them. They go in, they pick a U.S. source, a foreign source. They could have like 20, 30 countries they can pick from. And then they answer questions for each source. What's the quantity? What's the weight? What's the price at each? Frequency of delivery? What have you? And then the algorithms go through and calculate the carrying cost of inventory and freight cost and all this other stuff to figure out what the numbers. And it comes down to a total cost for each. And then it breaks them down by hard versus sort of subjective costs, and then it projects them into the future based on estimates of wage changes and currency changes in each of the countries.
So to make sure I heard you right, if a company was evaluating, let's say they're looking to buy some component that would cost $100 to make in a local U.S. supplier, if the China price is, what did I say? Did I say $100?
You said 100 in the U.S.
100 in the U.S. If it's $80 or more coming from China, the estimator would probably say, you know what, it's on par, or it's in effect total cost cheaper to use the local supplier.
Yeah, yes, but if it's a huge item that has a lot of material cost and not much labor cost, but a high freight cost, then that gap's going to be bigger. Whereas, so it's very dependent on what that that labor. So one way we have of depicting that is, let's see if I can get to share screen. Okay, if I can get to here. Okay, can you see that?
It's coming up. Okay. Yep, there it is.
Okay, so here's this is people have come in and used our total cost of ownership estimator. We keep their data confidential, but we analyze it, we slice it and dice it. So this is from hundreds of cases of people who studied China versus the U.S. And the blue graph here is when they looked at price and the mode. The high point here is maybe 72%, and when you shift to total cost, the mode is around 85%. And when you shift to total cost and you have a 15% Trump tariff in effect, the mode comes out to about 98%. So depending on which of these metrics you use and whether tariffs are in place, you get that big difference. You can see how the curves have shifted dramatically to the right. And 100% is where whatever the metric is where U.S. equals China. So you might say you're indifferent as between the two, depending on which method you're using. But when you take that data and you re-slice it, okay? So here's the same percentage of the U.S., and here's cumulative in the U.S. favor. So when the company looks only at price in 8% of the cases, in 8% of the hundreds of cases that were analyzed, did the U.S. win. When they looked at total cost, in 32% of the cases, the U.S. won. And if there was a 15% tariff on, in 46%. And I haven't actually done the math, but I think if you, in addition to that last number, if you could take 10% out of your U.S. manufacturing cost and price based on lean, advanced manufacturing, skilled workforce training, then that 46% would go up to 60% or more. So the question is, the simple thing, do the math and go from 8% to 32%.
Right.
find out if you've got a tariff on the product that you're bringing in, and then start on. If you're still not there, then go for some lean, some automation, some skilled workforce, some design for manufacturing, something to get the stuff over from the loser side to the winner side over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. And so then, do you track? People use the calculator. You see what the calculator says. Do they then report back to you of what their decision ended up being? I wonder.
I have had those who have done so. We don't require it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when people log in to use it, we're asking them to put their company costs into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we guarantee anonymity. We don't even ask their name or their company name, because otherwise I believe they wouldn't put the real data in, and then I couldn't make an accurate chart here. So we do have one, especially I think interesting case, Hubbardton Forge in Vermont. Despite the name, they make high-end lighting systems like fancy lamps and chandeliers for nice homes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten to know them quite well. They Steve, it's either Uyghurs or Weigers, I think it's Uyghurs, is the supply chain guy, and he's told me what they do. They when the Chinese price is 50% or more, that's 50% or more of the U.S. They do the analysis, and they've simplified our system. Of the 29 factors, they've said, these 20 are going to be the same in all cases because it's the same factory in China and the same country and the same whatever. So they say that's worth whatever, 8%, 10%, and they only look at these other 5-6 factors. And so now it's simple to do. And when they've done it, it's made a significant difference in the amount of, in this case specifically, aluminum die castings that they've imported from China and have shifted back to U.S. production.
Stop the screen sharing. And for those who are listening, Harry, I assume it'd be okay to post those two charts in the blog post for the episode.
I'd love you to do so.
So, leanblog.org/366. So there's this use of the TCO model for making these manufacturing location decisions and supply chain decisions. But what are some ways, I thought this was an interesting topic you had proposed. How can companies use TCO to increase sales?
Okay. Sales is good, especially now when things are sort of a little dismal out there, unless you're Amazon or somebody like that. So say my work applies mainly to manufacturing. Okay. So if you've got a manufacturing company, someone who's listening, and you're not the peak of the supply chain, you're somewhere down below. Let's say you're a foundry, just for example, and you can come to work with us and define the kinds of castings at which you're most competitive. Gray iron housings for the appliance industry, let's say, and then knowing that description and knowing an HS code, which is the import characteristic code for that kind of product. We go into a database that we subscribe to, and we can tell you who the largest importers are of those products, either in the country or within 500 miles, or whatever region is relevant to you. And so right now, when your foundry salesman calls on companies, they say, "Do you need castings next year?" And the customer says, "No, we're okay. China, there's lower price." Instead, the salesman comes in and says, "I see you're bringing in 100 tons of gray iron housings for appliances, and we've got a new molding machine in our foundry, and we're making products like that. Here's a sample. We've run the cost. Labor is only 10% of our costs, so we can't very well be more than 10% higher, even if in China there's no charge for the labor. And we've done the TCO calculation, and there's about 20 points associated with all these other costs. So we think you're going to be 10% better off if you give us the work. And let's get together and do this for your company profitability, your stability in the case we get another supply chain shock, for the good of our state, for the good of the country. Let's at least let's do the math. Let's get together and see if this works for both of us. So we've got companies out there that are doing this with us now, and we're helping them find new customers to sell to.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's I like that. So we have a question I wanted to ask. It was from another mutual friend, Dan Markovitz, and Dan was the guest actually one episode ago. So how about this? 3 episodes in a row. This was Serendipity. Mitch Kahn, Dan Markovitz, and now you, Harry. Dan's question was, is moving manufacturing or production back to the U.S. easier said than done sometimes if we don't have the skills or the supply base here anymore? What can we do? What are some strategies to try to address that?
Yeah. Well, in general, we have the skills. Let's say not in the quantity that China has, and maybe on the average, not quite at the pinnacle of excellence that Germany has with their excellent apprenticeship programs. But the skills are still here. Maybe they're baby boomers, ready to retire, but we've got the skills here, and the skills are starting to come back. Now I know machining best because that's where I come out of. My company was Charmy, now called GF Machining Solutions. We sold EDM machines and high-speed milling machines, excellent products. And so I know that industry. I've been working on the training in that industry for 30 years, and the Trump administration has done the best job I've seen of any of them in focusing on apprentice programs. They've committed $200 million to accelerate apprentice programs around the country. And I read all the time about companies starting apprenticeship programs, growing them, about community colleges having joint programs. Like my old company, Charmy, they have a program where they're doing apprentices for applications engineers and service engineers. So I see it happen. If you had a scale, you'd say Germany used to be a 10, and we used to be a 2. Maybe we're up to a 3 or a 4, and Germany's down to a 9 because all their kids want to go to university and study philosophy, like our kids. But at least we're moving in the right direction. Right? And another thing is, as reshoring happens, as people hear this message, as people who are at home now listening, if they like the message, have their high school kids listen to it, and let the high school kid understand that manufacturing is coming back. And where 5 years ago, the guidance counselor or the parent might have said, you'd be crazy to go into manufacturing. The uncle lost his job, but everything shut. Now, the factories are coming back. The work's coming back from China. Right. Half of the reshoring is from China. So just the success and the visibility of reshoring should be enough to motivate some kids to do that. Mm-hmm. And then the other question you asked was the supply chain. Mm-hmm. 20 years ago, China didn't have a supply chain, and they built one. Mm-hmm. But 20 years ago, we had everything. We made everything here, and there's some areas where it's lacking, but we have the technology and we have the money that we can do it. In fact, another service that we offer is called supply chain gaps. So if one of your listeners, if they were interested, they could come to us. And they could say they're really good at making a certain kind of widget, and we could tell them other products that are similar to those widgets, where there's say $100 million being imported and nobody's producing them in the U.S., and then that company could decide to horizontally expand its operations to produce the widgets that nobody's making here, and be the only U.S. manufacturer in a pretty big industry.
Yeah. Okay,
so we have methods to overcome that supply chain problem.
As we wrap up here, what do you think? We'll start with the U.S. first. I'm curious about what you know about similar efforts in other countries. But what do you think the U.S. government, federal, state level, can or should do to try to help accelerate reshoring?
All right, well, I'd say there's something that the Commerce Department has on its website called the ACE, ACE, Assess Costs Everywhere Toolkit. and it includes a link to our TCO estimator, on our website. And it hasn't, I don't think it's been worked on for the last 8 years when I first helped them do it. And so they could update that. They could put my chart on it, for example. That would stimulate some people to do something. They could train their MEPs, manufacturing extension partnerships, which are all over the country, to be more aggressive in doing this kind of thing. I think the president, I'd like to see President Trump call on companies and say, we've had this healthcare crisis. We have all kinds of medical products that were deficient. I want volunteer companies to make those products, and we'll make sure you get enough money for them that you'll at least make some profit on them. And then as soon as we're out of this crisis, I want companies to start looking at the other areas where we're deficient, and we're going to provide you a list of those, and we'll, if we have to, we'll put tariffs on those products for 5 years. You get a chance to get started and get going again. So if you have to do tariffs, I'm not encouraging tariffs, but if you had to do tariffs, focus them on the products where you want to rebuild the supply chain in the United States, and you want companies to reshore.
And then, I imagine there are efforts in other countries similar to yours. I saw a headline earlier, just peruse the article, that the French finance minister had put out a call encouraging French companies to kind of rethink some of their sourcing productions to be able to be self-sufficient, which sounds similar to what you were saying. It's more of a voluntary call than some invocation of the Defense Production Act.
Was that a recent call?
It was in the news today. I'll send you.
Yeah, because there was a member of the French cabinet about 10 years ago who did that, and for some reason 6 months later he was gone. So there have been the government of Netherlands put up billions of dollars to help their companies reshore. In the UK, there's an office. It's part of either BIS or BLS that is a reshoring office, and it's very proud of the fact that they've helped the auto assembly plants in the UK get much more of the components in the UK instead of from offshore. So they had good success. We've spoken in Holland and England and France and Switzerland on this subject. So good interest. I get calls from, and I've been interviewed by the Koreans and the Australians and almost every country. So everybody likes the idea. The question is to make it efficient, to make it happen.
And I mean, there may be some cases where Japan may be looking to reshore from China. It's not just about the distance,
right?
They
put up, I think, $2 billion to subsidize their companies to bring manufacturing back from China. Now, $2 billion can't get the whole thing done, but it's certainly a good start to do it. Another thing I'd like to mention, just a little bit off that subject, I'm working very closely with AMT, Association for Manufacturing Technology, which puts on IMTS, the 130,000 person show at McCormick Place in September. Yeah. And they're going to have a big focus on reshoring, something like rebuilding the domestic supply chain, more or less what we're talking about. And we have a whole series of webinars and podcasts and articles and things coming up to an exhibit with presentations. And if I could, I'll get President Trump out to help us. Yeah. And so anybody that's in that industry, I hope they'll come out. Now, there's also a National Metalworking Reshoring Award, which you can apply for. You can find it on our website, and a National Sewn Products Reshoring Award that we do with different trade associations. So now we've got lots of opportunities for people to get, we'd say, both more business and fame via reshoring. Yeah.
Cool. So here, I'm going to show you, I was wrong. This is actually an article from February, late February, but I saw a reference to it in something today that I was reading in the news. France urges business to rethink supply chains as coronavirus hits Asia. So it's called a wake-up call to French manufacturers. Now, that was maybe before the disease. People recognized the disease was spreading. This was more about, well, Chinese production is shut down, and that creates problems. That's different than a pandemic spreading. But
I understand. So one more thing just to mention, many of your listeners probably know AMA, Association for Manufacturing Excellence.
Right.
So I'm working with Kim Humphrey there, who's the leader, and Glenn Marshall, who's a good friend there. And they are going to have a significant focus on reshoring at the AMA annual in Toronto this year in October. Okay. So that's another chance for those of your viewers who are lean aficionados to get more involved.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing about that. And then finally, Harry, your website, the Reshoring Initiative, is reshorenow.org.
Correct.
Best place for people to go. I know there's a lot of information there. What else would you suggest?
Well, they're also welcome to email me. It's harry.moser@reshorenow.org. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you got a question, Harry, I'm trying the TCO estimator, I can't figure it out. Email me, call me, do whatever. My job is to help you achieve my mission, to bring 5 million manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.
Well, it's a great mission. As we wrap up, you mentioned New Jersey. I grew up. My mom, was from Flint, Michigan. So in the 80s and 90s, we saw the impact of manufacturing job loss there, where my one set of grandparents lived. My dad's parents lived in northeastern Ohio, where whenever we would go and visit, we would see down in the valley the skeletal remains of what used to be a vibrant steel mill. So I feel like there's kind of similar origins for me. It's an interest in this topic. For you, it's a passion. So I appreciate that you're doing a lot on this front. So Harry, thank you for that. Thanks for the opportunity. Great to talk to everybody out there. Okay. Well, I'm glad we could do this. Again, our guest has been Harry Moser, the Reshoring Initiative. Harry, maybe we'll get to do this again, and it'll be even better than this time. We can tell them how much we've all succeeded. Look forward to that. Again, thank you. Thank you very much, Harry.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.